Get ready.
So hi folks, how are you? I hope you are keeping well. In this episode, I'd like to just go through some of the things that I really love about this motorbike. If you watched my last video, which is the top 5 things I disliked about the motorbike, I think it's only fair that I go through the items that I do like. So I've listed 16 items. I tried to round it up to an even 20, but I just couldn't make it the numbers work. So I've listed 16 of the top things that for me are the best things I feel that are about this motorbike. Now bear in mind, I'm coming from I've only had this bike a few short months. I came from a GS 1200 Adventure, the air-cooled. I didn't initially like the early liquid-cooled versions. I thought the gearbox wasn't configured right, and it was a bit too quick, a bit more like a sports naked bike than it was an adventure touring bike. But certainly from about 2016 onwards, they totally changed that, and they've got the liquid cools an awful lot better. And I think with this 1250, they've absolutely nailed it right on the mark now. It's in my mind anyway, it's the best all-round motorbike you can get for your money on the market. So I just wanted to go through the items that for me, coming from the old bike, which was a 2009, to this 2019 HP Rallye Adventure, are the things that I find really good and are so much more better in terms of the old bike versus this new one. So let's crack on and let's get through them. So the first thing I want to talk about is the number of accessories you can get for an adventure bike. Obviously, as this is the market leader, there's more accessories seem to be available for this bike than there are for the others, but there's certainly a huge selection out there for every bike in this class. But anyone who's into touring and adventure bikes like I am, I've heard of Touratech. Now Touratech have a huge catalogue full of accessories for this bike and every other type of bike and biking in general. But it's like the Argos catalogue for motorbikers, and it's just a phenomenal amount of range of stuff, you know, and not just Touratech, but Givi and SW Motec and so on and so on. There's an almost infinite amount of stuff that you can get to customize and add on to this bike. You know, I've bought a lot of stuff, some of which I'll probably never use, but things like the toolbox on the side of the bike, you know, the panniers, the attachments to the panniers, lots of little things for the handlebars and the controls. There's just an endless amount of stuff that you can get for this bike, you know. And as you may have picked up, I'm a gizmo and gadget freak. I love my little gizmos. That's just a really added benefit to this bike to be able to go and buy things like that. So that's the first item. So the next item on my list is the screen on this motorbike. As I mentioned, I came from a GS 1200 Adventure 2009, and the screen on that, even though it was movable, it had to be done with tools, and you couldn't do it on the road or on the fly. The change now in these new ones is that you can obviously move this on the go. You can bring it up or you can bring it down. Now that seems like a very small, minor item, and I know people have laughed at me for when I picked up this motorbike for saying that this was a revelation, but it is. Coming from the old bike, this is phenomenal, because you know, when you're going from motorway driving, when you need it up to lessen the amount of air turbulence and airflow over you, then switching to the slower back roads, being able to do that on the move is absolutely fantastic. Now I know some of the other bikes like the K1600 and FJRs and stuff like that, that's an electronic version, and maybe someday they'll put it into this with the electronic version. I know some people are looking for it, but I think the reasoning behind that is because a bike like this, I think BMW is expected to fall over an awful lot more than the likes of a K1600. So you wouldn't want this bike falling over and damaging an electronic screen because the cost of replacement would be huge. Whereas with the manual mechanical version, it's very hard to break it, very robust, and it would be much more inexpensive to replace it if you did fall over. But for me, being able to do that as you're driving on the move is a fantastic little nuanced feature on the bike. So the next item on this is the frame. The frame on this has been totally powder coated and painted, which is a huge departure from the old 1200 that I had, the 2009. I found with that the paint on it had started to rust and flake off, and the whole subframe was starting to get quite rusty. You know, it was certainly in need of a job to be done. This frame, right straight from the factory, comes powder coated. So I'm hoping that will mean that this frame won't have the same issues as the old one. I have had some people sending me messages that the paintwork on these new bikes is not up to scratch, that they're having issues with it flaking and bubbling and scratching easily. I haven't had this bike long enough to come across that yet. I'm hoping that won't be an issue. But we'll see, only time will tell. But certainly from the looks of it, they've done a much better job in the frame on this bike as they did in the older air-cooled. So the next item then is the exhaust on this bike. This bike came with the Akrapovic Sport silencer on it. And you'll notice if you watched the last video about the things I didn't like, I don't like the sound from this bike, although that Akrapovic does make the bike sound better. But overall, the bike has a van or an agricultural sound. But I do like the look of the Akrapovic silencer. I think it's one of the best looking exhausts that they've put on these GSs in a long time. I've had some people saying that they don't like them. I don't understand why. I think they're very good looking exhaust. They really complement the bike very well and give it a bit more of a sporty, aggressive look. And I think they did a good job on it. The next item then on this bike is just the overall looks of it. I think in terms of aesthetics, this bike for me has it all. I think some people think it's ugly, and I can see why. It's quite, there's an awful lot going on up in the front, with the squinty headlights and all of that, and an awful lot of bars and everything. But to me, I think it's a beautiful bike. I like in particular this colour scheme. They have a good selection of colour schemes actually, but to me this one I thought was the best of them all. It's a bit of colour. It harkens back to the original BMW colours, and overall it allows you then to match your gear to it, etc. But for me, I just think it's a phenomenally good looking bike. I think it's certainly, I know when I'm driving through towns and villages on it, you can see people looking at it as you're driving through, so it's definitely a head turner. Even if you don't appreciate the looks of it, it's a very intimidating, large bike that creates an awful lot of presence, and there's no denying that. But certainly, it's what can I say? A fantastic looking bike. The next item on this is the tyre valves. Again, a huge improvement on the old air-cooled ones. And it's such a minor little thing, but they've put these new horizontally facing tyre valves onto the tyres, which are then obviously linked to the tyre pressure monitoring system. And that just makes life so much easier when you're checking the tyre pressure or inflating the tyres on these bikes. The old ones with the straight vertical valves, they were an absolute nightmare to get into, very difficult to get, particularly depending on the type of hose head that you were using in the garages. Some of them were just too long and weren't flexible enough to get down through the spokes to reach them. I know I had many a frustrating time trying to fill up the tyres depending on which type of pressure hose you were using. But these ones just make more sense. I'd always wanted to put these on the old bike, But from what I understand, if you had to put these onto the old bike, you couldn't have connected them to the tyre pressure system within the computer. So now that it has the best of both worlds, it's, as I said, a really small change, but it makes a world of difference. So a new feature onto these bikes is the SOS. An awful lot of cars, a lot of the modern cars have these, and it's good to see them going onto the motorbikes. And it's just a really good feature to give you a peace of mind. If you're like me and you do an awful lot of solo driving, to have something on that is really, really comforting. You know, if you come off the bike and you're down the back of beyond somewhere and you're by yourself, and God forbid something serious was to happen and you were to be immobilized, the SOS system on this bike will automatically detect that you've had an accident, and it will take your GPS locations and send it to the emergency services. So you'll know that even if you can't get to your bike or to your phone, or if you're unconscious or anything like that, that somebody's on the way, you know. And I think that, you know, in a modern society, that's a fantastic thing to have onto these bikes. Obviously, you can call it if you need it for an emergency breakdown or a recovery. Hopefully, if you have crashed, you won't be too seriously injured. You can cancel it if needed. There's a speakerphone in here that will allow you to talk to the emergency services through the bike. So even if you're on the ground and immobile, as long as you're within range of the bike and you're conscious, you can still talk to the emergency services through the bike. So it's just, this is when technology really, really makes an improvement to a machine like this. Sometimes they can put too much tech into them, but I think that's a really, really good feature for somebody when you're doing an awful lot of solo riders. I know there were systems out there that you could buy completely independent, called I think it was called the Spot device, which tracked your GPS location, and you know, you could push a button and it would do that. But now it's integrated in the bike, makes it just so much easier. So another item on this that I think has always been on the Adventures, but I think they've vastly improved it, certainly from my bike, the old 2009. The heated grips on this are absolutely incredible. They're much quicker to heat up than the old ones, and the heat out of them is an awful lot better. You know, within 30 to 50 seconds, the grips on these are at full strength, whereas the old one, it would take 2 or 3 minutes for them to heat up. And then what I do is, you know, as I've mentioned it before in previous videos, during the winter, what I would tend to do is I'd keep using my summer gloves, but I would put the hand muffs over this on the handlebars and then turn on the heated hand grips. And as a combination then, it just makes really comfortable driving. I know some people think that putting the hand muffs onto these bikes can make them look like a courier motorbike, but that doesn't bother me in the slightest. You know, it's all about, you know, keeping dry and keeping comfortable when you're driving, which ultimately leads to more safety. But yeah, these are a vast improvement on the old ones. So you can't be talking about these bikes and some of the things you love without talk about the Panniers system. I don't have them on at the moment. I'll put a picture up here. I'm sure if you've been following my videos, you know exactly which Panniers I've got. But there's a huge selection of panniers for these bikes, for all of these adventure bikes, from the Touratech to Jivy to SW Motec, soft panniers, hard panniers. Any type of pannier you want, you can get for this bike. But that's the whole point of this bike, is that this bike can take 2 people with all of their luggage, with a huge amount of capacity, all around the world, across multiple different types of terrain. You know, so the same bike that will take you in and out of work or on your Sunday drive can take all of your luggage for 2 people and drive you all the way around the world as many times as you like. So, you know, to have a bike that can take the capacity of the weight of, you know, 3 large boxes and 2 people and all of their belongings for that amount of time is just incredible, you know, and that's why this bike is you know, streets ahead, I think, and adventure bikes in general are just streets ahead of things like sports bikes or road bikes. But certainly it's a huge advantage is the pannier systems for these. The next item then is the final drive down here. This bike is a shaft-driven bike. It's not chain and sprocket-driven. And if you're like me, once you go to a shaft-driven bike like this, it's very hard to go back then to a chain and sprockets. You know, it's kind of like if you've been driving a manual car for years, like I used to, and then went to an automatic, you kind of think, why didn't I do this years ago, you know? Now, chain and sprocket bikes are great. I have my CBR 1100 Blackbird here. But the system on this is just fantastic, particularly on the new one. It's much more smooth than the last one. Now, I almost didn't buy my first GS because of, you know, the amount of stories I'd heard about the final drive on these bikes going. But I didn't find that the case. I got to 100,000 miles on my old GS, and the final drive never once went on it. So when you put that in perspective, 100,000 miles, how many chain and sprockets would you have to go through in your motorbike to get to 100,000 miles? And they're not cheap, you know. So the cost saving alone on that is phenomenal. And as I said, this one is particularly smooth. And I just think they just make much more sense these days. You know, as long as you're not driving the crap out of it, it should last your lifetime, as long as you always make sure it's serviced, well oiled. You should never have a problem with your final drive. But yeah, definitely a huge benefit for a bike like this. So a lot of the modern motorbikes now have DCT and hill start, as does this one. And it's a phenomenal new feature on them. You know, obviously these bikes are bought primarily to be driven up in mountain passes and stuff like that, in the Alps and the Lucia and so on and so on. So it's very advantageous to have something like a hill start and a DCT. I've grouped these together because it just makes sense to me. DCT is something new to me. I'm trying to get used to it. I'm starting to learn it as I go, but it's very handy in terms of not having to use the clutch for driving. I know a lot of the modern bikes have it, in particular the Africa Twin probably has the best one out there, where the bike is pretty much nearly totally automatic. And the one on this one is very good. It's smooth, certainly once you get into the higher revs and over first gear, but it's very handy. But even more handy, forgive the noise of the saw going on here behind me, but even more handy than that is the hill start. Two reasons. There's basically a handbrake on this now, and one of them, first reason is for hill starts going up. There's less danger of the bike rolling back when you're going to take off, which is obviously a good safety issue. But for me, the handbrake going down a hill is much more important. Often when you're touring and you're on a downhill, particularly a very steep downhill slope, historically what would happen if you needed to take a photograph was you'd always have to keep one hand on either the front brake or keep one foot up and put it onto the rear brake. Now you can just put on basically a handbrake. You just give an extra pull on the front brake and it locks the bike into place. And that leaves you able to put both your feet and both your hands free while the bike is pointing downwards. And then you can take photographs, or if you need to go through your tank bag or anything like that, it's very, very useful. So that's certainly a feature that I find really, really good on these modern bikes. The next item then, you can't talk about a GS Adventure without talking about the fuel range on it. The main difference between the Adventure, the GS Adventure and the standard road version is, well, there's a couple of differences, but the two main ones are the travel height on the suspension. But the other one then is the tank. There's an extended tank on the Adventure version. The fuel range on this is somewhere between over 350 to 400 miles. And when you're a solo driver, that's absolutely incredible. Obviously, if you're with a group, that can be limited by the bike with the smallest fuel capacity or highest fuel consumption. But if you're like me and do an awful lot of solo driving, well then a large tank range is brilliant. With this bike, for example, I can, as long as the tank is full, I can drive literally from early in the morning till the end of the day. And it's highly unlikely, if I'm doing mountain and back roads, that I'll have to fuel again until, probably halfway through the next day. So it just means that you're not stopping as much. You're not, panicking if you're getting low on petrol to get to the next petrol station and so on. But it's a really, really good feature for a bike that's built specifically for touring. I don't know of any other bike that has a range as far as the GS. If there is, let me know. I'd be very interested, but certainly this is one of the top fuel range bikes on the market. So the next item is a couple of items all grouped together. Coming from an old GS 1200 air-cooled, the 2009 model, to this is leaps and bounds ahead of it. This bike is incredibly powerful in terms of its engine, the power, the handling on it. It's unbelievably agile, particularly for the size of it. And the way all of that engine and stuff is combined and put together and integrated very well with the technology and the computer system on this, so that you have an awful lot of information available to you about what's going on the motorbike. Like I said, the power on these bikes is unbelievable. I've said it before, these bikes are very fast bikes that aren't built for speed. It's not a Fireblade or an R1 or an S1000, or a Hayabusa, but it's extremely quick. It's certainly in excess of 140 miles per hour on its top speed. But more importantly than that is its acceleration is extremely quick. I never felt that my old 1200 was lacking in power or handling until I sat onto this thing. I'll do my research on it, and certainly from driving it, it feels very quick, but it has a 0 to 60 of about 3.8 seconds. That's, just shy of 4 seconds, or just slightly above 3.5 seconds from 0 to 60. So to put that in perspective, a Formula 1 car, I think the fastest a Formula 1 car has been recorded is about 1.6 seconds from 0 to 60. So they'd average about 2 seconds. So this is only about 1.5 seconds or so slower than a Formula 1 car from 0 to 60. And to further put that into perspective, if you were to compare it to a car, a decent mid-range, powerful brand name car, say like a BMW 5 Series, the 0 to 60 in that would be somewhere around 7 to 8 seconds. So this bike, even though not built for speed, is extremely quick. And that comes into play, when you're on the back roads, being able to switch back and forward on the corners very quickly. It's so agile. It's very light and nimble. For a modern bike, it's very good. To get an equivalent car, you'd probably have to buy something like an Audi RS8. It's about 100 grand plus to be able to compete in terms of speed like this. So it's very good. The one thing I would say about this bike is, in terms of its handling, its power and torque, is that, and its ability off-road is, in particular, is I'm not the limiting factor. Sorry, the bike isn't the limiting factor to the riding. I'm the limiting factor, and that's the way it should be. This bike can do far more that I'm capable of driving. So I'll never be held back because of this bike. It's capable of far more than I can get it to do, which is a testament to the bike and the engineering of it. But that would certainly be the next item that I really find I love about this bike. So coming to the last couple of items, and certainly in the top two, is the dash on this. I haven't seen a dash on another motorbike to compete with the dash on this BMW. This new tablet type electronic dash on it is absolutely fantastic. I'll never get bored of the startup screen in this. And then, flicking through all the menu systems within it. I love the fact that it's highly integrated with all your communication systems, that you can link your sat-nav, a rudimentary sat-nav through it, your email, your phone, your texts, everything through the dash. It's very user-friendly. It doesn't have any glare really on it when it's been driven in bright sunlight. Easy to read. I like the way that it's color coordinated when the revs go through the rev range, telling you when the bike is warm and cold and how much to rev. It's just a really beautiful system. I know there are some other systems out there that kind of look similar, but I've yet to see one that is as good as the BMW one. certainly in my mind, it's just the coolest feature on this bike. It's absolutely really, really cool. So the number one thing that I love about this bike, and this is certainly a personal thing for me, as I've alluded to before, I'm vertically challenged. I'm about 5'6". I have a 29-inch inseam, and even my old GS 1200 Adventure was very intimidating when I first bought it. It was extremely high. I had to get an extra low Touratech seat put on it. I had to keep it in the low suspension settings just to get, about 70 to 80% of my foot down. Very precarious when you're on uneven ground or loose ground. Certainly very precarious if you had a pillion on it, just getting people on and off and then lifting the bike up. There was at least one occasion where, I fell over because of it. So to have a bike now that's factory lowered, has an adjustable seat, and has dynamically adjustable suspension or manually adjustable suspension via the electronics on this, I can now get my 2 feet firmly down onto the ground on both sides, which is absolutely incredible. That makes this bike and just riding in general far more manageable, far less intimidating. The minute I sat on the bike and started driving it, it was the first thing I noticed about it, how much easier it was to drive because I could get both of my feet down. What's unusual about the height of a lot of these bikes is that the smaller engine bikes like the 800s are actually taller than the 1200s. But certainly my last bike was a problem. You do get used to it after a while, and you figure out how to manage it. But now at this bike, it's just been absolutely incredible, So for me personally, and I know it wouldn't be everybody's first choice for the thing they like most about their bike, but being on the other one for so long and then coming to a new modern bike, a better bike that's now, where you can get both your feet down is just incredible. So that's definitely my number one item. So that's all of my items for the things that I love about these bikes. These are just the ones I could think of off the top of my head. I'm sure later on I'll sit down and go, I forgot something. But I hope you liked it. Let me know what it is that you like about your bikes and send your comments in below. But hopefully this COVID-19 is going to lift. It looks like it's going to lift a little bit sooner than they had planned. The Irish government have now said that they're going to lift it on about the 29th of June. Instead of the 20th of July. So that means we'll get out and about a bit sooner. So hopefully you've been staying safe. Let me know what you thought of the video. See if you can click the old like button and subscribe and share it with your friends. And I'll talk to you again soon, okay? Take care.